This is Crow Inquisitors, and we are here with another behind-the-scenes look at our game. Today, we're not going to be talking about any particular character, but I wanted to touch on a kind of a GMing concept in Burning Wheel, and the latter half of these behind-the-scenes looks are going to be those sorts of things. So we're gonna touch on various like GMing kind of behind-the-scenes stuff. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is character change in Burning Wheel. So the Burning Wheel, as you maybe have noticed by now, if you're paying attention to the way the rules work, is made to be a very long-term game, right? So the way that advancement happens, the way that Artha is gained, as we just discussed in a previous episode, in one of the rules explanations, we have the Artha feats, right? We have Aristeas and Epiphanies, and those obviously take a long time to gain. Right? The Burning Wheel is made to be played long term, and it's been fun to play Crow Inquisitors for 3 seasons now, and hopefully, we'll be doing a 4th season coming up here soon. But so character change in Burning Wheel, because it is such a long form game, is something that's really important. And there are a few reasons why it's important. I bring up the long term nature of the game first, because advancement and Artha and all of that stuff, right? That obviously has a lot to do with that kind of long-term character change. Seeing a character grow and gain strength and power is obviously something that is important to any role-playing game. There are some role-playing games that are less involved in actual like power and advancement in terms of like your character getting stronger. Burning Wheel isn't one of those. Burning Wheel has a lot of room to grow for character advancement. The interesting thing about Crow Inquisitors, though, is that we started off each of the characters at 5 life paths. Because of the particular kind of setting and starting kind of like scenario we had, the inciting incident in the general campaign concept, we wanted to give the characters a little bit more oomph from the beginning. I think probably what ended up happening first is David was making his character, and we realized he needed 5 life paths to like accomplish the character concept he wanted. And so I was like, you know what? I like the character concept you're going with. I'm interested in seeing that as like a main focal point of the campaign. So let's go ahead and do 5 life paths for everybody. Now, normally in the Burning Wheel, 4 life paths is the average. It's kind of like the standard. And I've played a few campaigns with the Burning Wheel with 3 life paths, and honestly, 3 life paths can be a lot of fun because characters are still very much finding themselves, right? So if you start with 3 life paths, you have skills and stuff, right? Obviously, you have things you can work with, but you really start from a position of kind of fresh beginnings, right? You start with a lot of room to grow because of the way gaining new skills works. The lower the skill you have, the faster it will, increase. And so starting off with a bunch of low skills or a bunch of, open slots for skills means that a lot of new skills are learned. With Crow Inquisitors, for example, we have 5 life paths, right? The characters are pretty set in their ways. Most of what we saw was maybe 1 or 2 skills that people were learning because they realized they needed to have it for their character concept and kind of had to quickly learn it. So like Dellen, for example, learned observation pretty quickly because he was doing a lot of, and honestly, we think we talked about this already, but he was using observation tests for stuff that he probably shouldn't have been using it for. But still, as the campaign stands right now, he has the observation skill and he didn't have it before. And that's obviously an interesting thing about Dellen's character now, later in the game than it was at the beginning. It was a character change that it was induced there. But mostly what we're seeing with Crow Inquisitors in terms of like power advancement is we're seeing slow builds on their really powerful stuff, right? So if you start with a 6 in a skill, which is the max you normally start with a skill in Burning Wheel, it takes a while to bump that up. And I believe either we have seen that. I feel like Alphonse already leveled his up to 7 at this point in the campaign, his persuasion. But if he hasn't, he's about to. It's going to happen pretty quickly here because he's been obviously rolling so many of them. And the way Jared works, of course, he min-maxes his tests so that you can get the right ones, so he can actually advance things. But yeah, I mean, a lot of what we're seeing is just people slowly building up the tests that they need to advance their powerful skills, even beyond into ridiculous levels, right? So having a 7, 8, 9, or 10 in a skill is, kind of insane. It's ridiculous skill levels for a normal human being. That's what we're seeing a lot of. And obviously we see character change in that realm. But one of the other things that's important about specifically the Burning Wheel, right? And this is, I think, the main reason I wanted to bring up character change as a thing that's important to the Burning Wheel, is because the game itself is so focused on characters as the main focal point of the game, right? So in the sense that the things that I push on as the GM, the way that they interact with the game via the Arthur mechanics, we have beliefs, instincts, and traits, right? We have things that our characters believe, things that our characters do instinctively, and things that our characters are. And those things are the things that change, right? That's why we have trait votes. I guess affiliations and reputations also kind of count in this when we're looking at this stuff, right? We see characters change using those mechanics. And because Burning Wheel's reward system, like the Arthas system, the currency system of the game, is so focused on the bits, right? The beliefs, instincts, and traits. Those are the things that change a lot. And the reason that they do is because Burning Wheel pushes you, because of by virtue of the bits being so important, to discover for yourself what your character really cares about. Right? So we have a character like Cantarius, for example. Cantarius starts off the game with beliefs about his staff, right? A belief about like the mission, and I think he had a belief about Jared's character, Alphonse, starting off right away, where he was like, his morality was like, Jared is someone who needs to be punished. And so those are things that Connor was interested in pushing on as a character, right? He has the trait blind starting off. He has instincts about trying to take the lead in a confrontation. But what we found really quickly with Cantarius, like just again, as an example, is that Connor found what he was interested in and not interested in and changed his character based on those interests and based on the way that I was pushing on them as a GM. And changed his character kind of rather drastically in some ways, and a lot of characters changed rather drastically in this way. So obviously Cantarius, if we're continuing with that example, he was like, I want to be the leader in a confrontation, right? If the confrontation happens, I take the lead. He never did it, right? In the first few sessions, he had opportunities to do so, and he didn't. I think there's maybe one time he did, but it was rather minor, and then he just kind of moved on from it. But what Connor realized is that his character, and I think we talked about that a little bit on his behind the scenes episode, but I think he found, given the party dynamic and maybe what he was interested in as a player, his character wasn't going to take the lead and take more of a support role. And that's the sort of stuff that's really important to Burning Wheel, right? Burning Wheel is about character change. It's about the sort of nitty gritty realizations that you have as a player and, just playing as the character of what matters to the person, to that character, and what depths they will sink to or heights they will rise to in order to accomplish the things they believe in, right? So if we think about Theo, for example, Theo has, at the beginning of the game, beliefs about doing whatever Norani wants him to do, right? I will kill anyone for the goddess. And I, of course, looking at that belief as a GM, specifically for the Burning Wheel, right? My job is to push on those things, right? My job is to challenge them, right? To the player is telling me something about their beliefs, right? They're saying, I care about this thing in the game, and I want my character to interact with this thing, right? This is something that my character cares about, and so I want to be able to accomplish this thing. This is something I believe on, but my job as the GM is to take that and then say, okay, do you really believe this? And to challenge them with it, right? Not only put obstacles in their way to overcome in doing those things, right? Like a normal thing, like, Dylan has a belief about trying to, I'm trying to think of an example. I'm not trying to point to anything specific here, but let's, I guess, just say for the sake of argument, right? Someone has a belief about um, well, okay, let's do this. Dellen's belief about trying to find out more about the heretics, right? Try to find the heretics in his little bonus episode. So we have that sort of situation. So obviously, as a GM, that whole session, I was putting obstacles in his way to finding out those pieces of information, to getting to where he needed to go in his investigation. And most of the time, I just did the normal stuff, right? I was just like, well, there's a swords lady who's going to attack you. There is a drunk who is obfuscating. There's these red herrings, right? Those are just obstacles I can throw in his way normally. But one of the things that I love to do in the Burning Wheel, and one of the things that is the most rewarding to do in the Burning Wheel Artha cycle, right? The kind of give and take between beliefs, instincts, traits, and Artha, is for me to say, okay, this is something that you say your character believes in, right? So we have Theo. He says, I will kill anyone for the goddess because I want my wife back, right? That's his belief there. He will do whatever Narani asks him to do. And so I think to myself as a GM, okay, I need to give Narani people that Narani will tell him to kill people that I know that Adam, as a player, would be opposed to, right? And I assume then, as Theo, that he'll also be opposed to it. But that's not always the case, right? So this is us kind of like feeling out together as we're kind of just constructing this narrative. It's not even that I'm like trying to push on what Theo what Adam as a player is comfortable with. That's not so much what I'm doing as I'm trying to feel out for Adam playing Theo. How far will he go with Theo? When he thinks about Theo, does he think cold-blooded murderer will do anything to get my wife back, even if it involves killing the abbess, for example, or this child who is sick, right? And I came up with reasons for why Narani would ask him these things. But me as a GM, I'm thinking through it and I'm saying, what are people that I could tell, with his belief that he has, that I could tell Narani to have him kill, that I know Adam would have to think twice about, right? Where he wouldn't just immediately do it, even though he has instincts and beliefs that are pointing him in that direction. Adam has control over Theo as a character. And so it's my job as a GM to not only put obstacles in his path to, succeeding at a belief, but also to give him challenges, to give him second thoughts, maybe, to push on that belief and say, how far will you really take this belief? How much do you believe this? And those are some of the most interesting moments because we see a character change, right? Stories aren't interesting unless we see, for the most part, right? There are definitely examples of stories where characters don't change and it's fun and whatever. But for the most part, and specifically for Burning Wheel, right? Burning Wheel as a game is fundamentally built to pivot on characters changing, right? That's what all of the rules in the game are there to do, is to show us characters that change by virtue of setting up this Artha cycle, setting up the reward system of the game to push a player playing a character to decide for themselves what their character actually believes and how far they're willing to go to actually accomplish their goals. And in the process of that, there will be pushes and shoves where I push a little bit too hard for the character's comfort, right? And the player decides, you know what? I don't think my character would actually believe this, right? And that's what Theo did, right? As we've seen in the game so far. Theo did a 180. He said, you know what? If I'm faced with killing this woman who looks like my wife and reminds me of how much I loved my wife, or to kill this child who reminds me of the child I could have had as a father, Theo wouldn't do that, right? Theo, that's as far as his belief goes. He'll kill scoundrels and men who maybe have sordid pasts. He'll do those sorts of things for sure for the goddess. That doesn't matter to him. And maybe he doesn't ask too many questions about the guys he's killing. But when he's faced with difficulties, when he's faced with a choice that obviously comes up against other parts of his character, will he go as far as his beliefs are saying he will go, or will he back down? And that's another great thing about Burning Wheel is often I as a GM will be able to find chinks in the armor in this way. Like, contradicting beliefs, instincts, and traits, right? So we have a character who has a belief about doing this certain thing, and then they have an instinct that in a particular situation, maybe I can construct a situation where I'm like, well, okay, I'm not going to make a situation where this belief would be triggered, but also this instinct is triggered and they're opposing each other, right? Which one is going to win out? Is Cantarius's when there's a confrontation, I take the lead, going to win out, or is his belief about morality gonna win out, right? Is his like self-righteous belief that like he was spared for a reason and he needs to administer his own justice? How far, and maybe that's not a good example actually now that I'm thinking about it, but I can't think of an example off the top of my head as to like one of these that is directly kind of contradicted. But really honestly, this sort of stuff comes up in particular situations, right? And I guess for a lot of the stuff that's happened in Crow Inquisitors so far, what I've been doing as a GM is I've been pushing on beliefs and instincts and traits, right? I've been pushing on a lot of those things and giving things. Here's what it is. You know, for example, Cantarius having the instinct never harm a child, and I put the child in the way of his belief about doing the mission, right? He's here to do a mission for the Crow Inquisitors, right? He is a Crow Inquisitor. He has a job to do. And then I say, but wait, there's a child in your way, right? This child is looking up at you and saying, what are you doing to my dad? How is Cantarius going to react? Is he going to do the mission? Is he going to do what he's been told to do? Or is he going to let his instinct override that belief? And then we see an interesting character development. Then we realize that what Cantarius really cares about is not harming a child. And that's an interesting character development that we could, maybe we could have assumed before, right? But until we actually get to that, before we actually see those conflicting emotions on Cantarius's face as Connor describes him to us, we won't know for sure. And that's the beauty of a game like Burning Wheel. We are learning together what the characters will do and what they care about. And sometimes this will be a purely player thing, right? Like, for example, I think we talked about this recently on episode of Idle Inspiration where I talked about the game Fate, Fate Core, and Fate Accelerated from Evil Hat Productions. When we first did a game of Fate Core, one of the things you have aspects in that game, and basically it's just like a phrase that describes something about your character. And what I can do as a GM in that game is I can compel a character to do a certain thing by offering them a reward. And they can refuse the compel based on their aspects, but they have to, give me a point. Give me some, they're punished for it. Not necessarily punished, but there's a cost to it. And so Connor's character, when we first did this Fate game a while ago, he started off with an aspect lusts after women, right? He's like, man, my character is going to have a problem with that. And then I pushed on it and I said, okay, I think you should, go act in this certain way towards this gal. And Connor realized very quickly, he's like, whoa. Actually, I, as a player, I don't want to do that. And I don't want my character to do that. And he changed the aspect. Same sort of thing happens in the Burning Wheel, right? A character who has, like, for example, Connor, never, when there's a confrontation, I take the lead. He realized, you know what? That's just not something I'm interested in. And obviously it had to do somewhat with the player dynamic, as we discussed earlier. But in a lot of ways, characters will just discover that they aren't this way. And maybe they thought they were. And I think we talked about this with David when we talked about Delin, right? Delin is this way in the season for sure, right? At the very beginning of the game, the first 3 sessions, Delin is really hardcore, like, I am going to kill anyone who gets in my way. And if in Alphonse, I'm going to cut out your tongue. Like, if you say another word, like, he is just really aggressive and antagonistic towards pretty much the whole party. And pretty early on, David, as a player, decided, you know what? I'm just not interested in that. And so there will be a little awkwardness in a role-playing game like this, where a player decides that they aren't as interested in a character concept they thought they were, and then they'll make a change. I can remember something as simple as a character voice can be like this in any role-playing game. I remember in our D&D campaign, Ternalius, my player Jordan, he had a character voice starting off with this character, and he was like a dwarf barbarian, and he decided to have like a really just obviously, stereotypically like I'm a dumb brute voice. And that definitely flavored the way Darius was to us. But really early on, Jordan decided, you know what, I'm going to take a little bit of a step back from that and present a different side of a non-intelligent barbarian like dwarf that is maybe a little bit more nuanced than that. And obviously, when we listen back through those early sessions, it's there, right? The voice of Darius the Dumb Brute is there. We can't erase it. But that's not really who the character is, and we had to play a little bit to decide that, to figure that out. That's the sort of stuff that the Burning Wheel does really well, because in a game like D&D, for example, those sorts of things kind of happen without the mechanics ever being involved, right? But the Burning Wheel forces the mechanics to be an integral part of character change, right? Character change really happens in the Burning Wheel because you pushed on the mechanics and you didn't like what they pushed back on you, right? You look at a belief and you say, well, I don't want to go after this, and so I have to change the belief because I still want fate points, right? I still want to accomplish this and get a persona point. And so those are the moments that Burning Wheel does really well, not only because we have this long format, right, where a character is going to go through lots of cycles of change, and who they are at the beginning of a campaign is going to be drastically different from who they are at the end of the campaign. And that is something that we kind of feel out and explore for ourselves, but we do it in such a way that directly hits the mechanics, which makes it not only much more directly engaging and directly forces us to do those things when maybe in another game we wouldn't be so actively digging into our characters' heads. But a game like the Burning Wheel excels when that is the focal point, because it's a game about characters, and because when the characters push back on you and you push on them and you kind of mold and feel it out like clay, it ends up being a much more satisfying role-playing game experience than a game that the mechanics don't hit those sorts of things, right? You'll definitely have your character change, but I mean, to be honest, the most important character changes for a D&D character are, did I get a new feat, right? Do I have a new attack bonus? Did I get a new skill? And even that's rare. For the most of the part, for most of the time, you're just going through a natural progression path with the same thing you started off at level 1, right? And obviously there's nuance to that, but the Burning Wheel puts the direct character changes about like their personality and the way they interact with the world in a very like emotional and relational sense. It puts those on the forefront, where that sort of thing, if it happened in a D&D game, would be incidental to the mechanics. These sorts of things are essential to the mechanics of the Burning Wheel, which is why I think it's probably the best role-playing game I've ever played. Because it doesn't... A good game, in my opinion, and obviously this is just my opinion, a good role-playing game is one where the mechanics of the game itself make the narrative happen, right? A game of D&D, for example, that's just as an antithesis of this. A game of D&D, you can do an entire game of D&D, and the entire thing is just about killing monsters. And the narrative, the story that the game, or the story that the campaign has, right? For us as players, we're playing a game and we're like, well, there's this quest and there's a god trying to destroy the world and we have to stop him. And my character is a hero and all of that stuff. The mechanics never touch it, right? You can be the same character as a 20th level fighter who has done nothing but bash orcs' heads in, and he hasn't changed one bit. His character has never changed, and you get to the end of the campaign, and there you go. And it's the same character, right, mechanically, as a character who is a 20th level fighter and has had betrayals and romances and quests. All of that stuff is just a thing that the players and the DM in that game throw onto the game as kind of like clothes, right? But that's not the Burning Wheel. And I think D&D as a system suffers from it because any story that happens is sort of incidental to the rules. But a game like the Burning Wheel, it punches you in the face with the fact that if you want a story to happen, you have to play the game. You can't just talk, right? You can't just sit there and have a conversation in character and then at the end of it be like, well, cool, I guess our characters just decided something about, we just came to an agreement. No. You make a roll, right? We're engaging with the mechanics of the game. I can't reward you as a GM with a belief unless you made a roll towards it, right? Unless you work towards it. And so those sorts of pivotal character moments about a character changing, becoming someone else, having betrayals, romances, all of that directly hits the mechanics of the game, which means when you're playing the game, you're playing the game. And not only is the story not incidental to it, but the mechanics actually drive the story onward in a way that D&D or another role-playing game that takes the kind of like story is different from mechanics approach. They can't do this, right? A game of D&D can't have a moment where a character's beliefs and instincts conflict with each other in this horrifying moment of realization where a character understands that the two pieces of themselves are now warring with themselves and they have to make a decision, and whatever decision they make, well, it may just give them a persona point or a deeds point or maybe no worth at all. And that's a direct hitting on the mechanics of the game. In a game of D&D, you can do a whole thing of betrayal, romance, and at the end of that whole story arc, nothing mechanically has changed. And you kind of had to come up with all of it on your own. Burning Wheel gives you those things, right? Burning Wheel gives you story by virtue of looking at your character sheet and realizing there's stuff there to be explored. And when you come across things in the game, if I'm doing my job as a GM, right, I'm challenging your beliefs. I'm trying to give you things to care about or things to maybe you realize you don't care about because of how I'm pushing on them. And those sorts of things are giving us story, right? They're directly driving the story in a way that's almost independent of us because the game itself is thrusting us forward. And that's the sort of game that I think is best, where we're playing a game and the game is the story and the story is the game. The mechanics aren't incidental to what we're doing. We're not just improving with maybe a roll here or two if we just can't figure out what happens next, right? That's not what we're doing. The entire not the railroad, but the bones on which this the frame on which this book is bound, right? The story is bound. It is a fundamentally mechanical thing, right? It's a substantive thing. It's there. You push on it. It pushes back. And that is what I love about the Burning Wheel and the way it deals with character change. And we're going to see a lot more of that as we continue with Crow Inquisitors. You're going to see a lot of character change. You're going to see a lot of growth. You're going to see a lot of regression. And I hope that you enjoy coming along with us for the ride. And I think that's about it for me. Thanks for listening to me ramble about role-playing games on this edition of the little behind-the-scenes stuff. This has been a kind of a deep dive into Burning Wheel and character change. We'll be back soon with another full episode of Crow Inquisitors. Thanks for listening.